Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Rodney Davis, and I'm serving as the co-chair of this conference, and also I get to give you a brief opening welcome to this fifth international conference on the latest trends in education and in research, with the theme being research then and now, development then and now. And so I'm certainly happy to have you at our conference hotel, the Crown Legacy, there in Baguio City. My presentation is going to kind of do a then and now comparison for what's going on in research. I'm not going to focus so much on the development side, and simply because at first when I thought about this theme and what it really means for researchers today, I kind of had the knee-jerk reaction of research is research. There's just nothing new in this area. But as I begin to look at some of the changes that I've seen in research, I began to realize, yeah, there's a lot of things that we do differently today that we didn't do 15, 20, 30, and more years ago. So I hope that what I have for you will be insightful and help you to kind of focus some of the things that you're doing in research today. So let's go ahead and get into the presentation. Keeping the theme research then and now in mind, I thought it'd be important for us to first define the term trends, because that's really what we're looking at when we compare research today and research, say, 50 years ago or 10 years ago or whatever that time period may be. So keep that in mind as we look at the definition of trend. A trend is a general direction that an organization is going, an industry is going, and it deals mainly with looking at change. So when we look at trends, we're looking at how the activity, the organization, or whatever it is we're looking at has changed from one moment to the next, 1 year to the next, 1 decade to the next. So guiding questions that deal with trends would be, how is research different today than from, say, previous generations? Here we're looking at maybe 25 years ago. You would see some difference in research. And since we know that research has changed, what do these trends mean for today's researchers? And that's why when you look at these next few slides, you're going to see where I talk about what does this mean for you, and see that there are a lot of opportunities that come into play as we look at the individual trends. The title of my session, as a kind of an introductory or keynote address, is 12 Tangible Ways Research Has Changed. It's simple, it's straight to the point. Research is changing and has changed and will continue to change as you see in the slide here, it rockets ahead, rockets forward. Trend number 1. What was considered research then has changed. Originally, most research was quantitative and it was experimental. So in your mind's eye, you might think of research, say 50, 100 years ago, was more of a quantitative design, where they were looking to manipulate variables to see if that had an impact on a particular population or a subgroup of that population. But over the years, we've seen increased interest in research, and new methodologies are constantly being added and are gaining acceptance. Now, there was a long time that qualitative methods were not considered valid methods. They were sloppy research. They weren't at the same level as quantitative methods, but since people have done them and they have been validated, we're seeing more and more of it. So qualitative methods that are validated and useful, such as phenomenological type studies, looking at particular groups, populations, and things, but looking at more of a direction, not to impact the population or impact a particular variable, more about just trying to understand the phenomena that they're seeing. So we see a lot of survey research, ethnographic research, case studies, mixed methods, and that's one of the biggest changes that I've seen in, say, the last 10 or 15 years. The increase in doing mixed methods research, where I'm more of a either do quantitative or qualitative research, because it's very hard to do either one very well when you're trying to do them at the same time. But it seems to be industry-wise that there are a lot of institutions that are expecting doctoral students to do mixed methods research. And since that is something that's happening, I think we're going to see more of it as people are being directed and advised in that way. So what does this mean for you? Well, it means that you have a lot of different ways of analyzing the phenomena. You have a lot of different ways to manipulate variables, and that's a good thing. You're not locked into one particular way of examining a problem. Another change that we see is then research was done a lot different than it is today. So how we conduct research has changed over the years. Now, if you look at the right side of this slide, you're going to see what looks like a library. And that is simply because in years gone by, most research had to be done in the library because that's where the books were. That's where the journal articles were. You had to go to them. You had to go to a card catalog to find a listing of all the books and materials on a particular topic. It meant that you were spending hours in the library. I can remember working on my dissertation and spending hours in the stacks, grabbing books and looking at old manuscripts and journals and things to find what I needed. And that's been just 20 years ago. Yes, there were computers, and yes, there was a lot of information on the internet, but still the things I needed were in the library among the stacks. And so you saw people in those days sitting at tables with books piled all around them as they were looking for sources. I would say that research historically has been a much more physical activity because you had to go to the research. You had to sort it out, and then you had to follow the track of the research wherever it might lead, and then you realize it led to a dead end, so you dropped that, and then you had to pick up another track to find it and follow it. Now, I say that research is far more passive because you're sitting at a computer and you're doing your research online, and instead of looking at topics, you're looking more at keywords to find the materials you're looking for. And because of the internet, you can look at full-text articles. You can look at full-text books online. You're not having to go to the library. I think it's a lot easier to find material. I'm not so sure that the material we're finding is necessarily the best material, because just because it's online doesn't mean it's great. There are a lot of great resources that are still in print that are beneficial, and we shouldn't forget those either, just because they're not online. So, yeah, research has changed in how it's being conducted, and I think that's kind of a good thing, because it's made it a lot easier. We're not spending as much time having to look through things. We can find it quicker because of internet searches. Trend number 3 deals with publication opportunities. Historically, there have been a limited number of journals in which to publish your research, and all of them were print journals. And the way that you submitted articles was you sent them in according to the guidelines that they provided you. They were mailed, and then it was left with the committee who was going to review it, and then you would receive an acceptance or rejection notification mailed to you. It was very time consuming. It could take up to a year or even more for you to receive anything on your journal. Now, we've seen an explosion in the number, just a rapid growth in the number of academic journals. One site that I was looking at showed that there were 100,000 academic journals, probably an estimate out there, in all of the disciplines, about 100,000 academic journals. What I think was noteworthy wasn't the number of journals, but was the fact that nearly half of them are published online, and of the half that are published online, half of those are solely published online. In other words, they no longer have a print edition of their journal. It is completely done online. Now that's great for libraries, because a library likes those online journals, which makes it possible for you to sit in your office or sit at home or sit at Starbucks and access that journal article without having to come to campus, to go to the library and find it. I can tell you now that it's been a long time since I've been in our university library, because I can have access to the same things right here. So, what is the amount of publications have to do with you? What does it mean to you? Well, it means that you have plenty of places to publish your research. And yes, publish in Tier 1 journals if you can get into them. But if not, don't be disappointed. There are plenty of other journals in which to get your research out to the public, and take advantage of some of those lower tier ones. Maybe you look at a Tier 2 journal, and Tier 1 is the premier research journal. Tier 2 is obviously a little bit less. They have probably greater acceptance rates, which make it a little bit easier to get in as a junior faculty member. So I would look at Tier 2 journals and submit to those, so that you're getting your research out there. Trend number 4 deals with where you present your research. Obviously, learned societies, conferences, there have been more, I think, in times gone by. I would say in the last, 15, 20 years since I've been at the university, the number of presentation opportunities have decreased a little bit, and I think a lot of it is just due to what you'll hear later on about budget issues. It's very expensive to put on a conference, and a lot of societies have decided not to do that. But there are still hundreds of presentation opportunities in the United States alone, but worldwide there are just conferences everywhere where you can get your research out. And that's what a lot of researchers are doing, is they're not only publishing their manuscripts, they're also presenting them at conferences as well. And I have chosen to publish at conferences that have a peer-reviewed journal, because that way I'm kind of cutting out a step. But there are plenty of those opportunities, especially in Asia. There in the Philippines, you're at one of those conferences right now. And there are plenty in the Philippines being conducted. Nearby in Malaysia, there are others. Hong Kong has a great number of them. And of course, Australia as well. Another facet of the presentations is that more and more of them are allowing virtual presentations, like what you're experiencing with me right now. Travel schedules don't make it possible for me to come to the Philippines at this time of the year, so what I'm doing is a virtual presentation. And you get to see me, you get to hear me, and you get the information without me having to travel, which helps with the budget. A lot of these events, because they are desperate to get participants, have very reasonably priced registration fees. And so many universities are willing to cover the cost of your travel to the event, because they know you need to do research, they know you need to present your research, and are making funds available. And of course, there are conferences in almost every discipline that you can think of. The way to find them is this web address that I've placed on the slide, www.worldconferencecalendar.com. It's updated fairly frequently, and it lets you know all of the events that are going on. And then there are links to those individual conferences, so you can click on them and go straight to those events. Trend number 5 deals with collaboration. And we're seeing a lot of changes in this area, where the expectation is that higher ed is collaborating with K-12 in the conducting of research. Historically, looking back, research was a pretty solitary activity. You had one or two professors maybe working on a research study together, or various parts of a research study. And collaboration was limited because it was very competitive. The idea was that you wanted to get your research out before the guy down the hall who was working on the same research, so that you got the credit. Today, that's not so much the issue as it is, especially here in the Philippines, the need for K-12 teachers to be conducting research to get promoted. And so what there has been a real emphasis on is higher ed faculty working with K-12 teachers to study problems, now from an education standpoint, what's going on in schools, and working together. A lot of action research has been the focus. But in other disciplines, people are working with non-government organizations. They've been working with businesses to conduct research that is meaningful to that discipline. So why the collaboration? Well, because I think it's a way to increase your productivity. You got more hands to help with the research. I think that it also means that the rigor increases because you have more eyes looking at the research to be sure it's high quality. And then because more people have looked at it and more people have been a part of developing it, you gain a wider acceptance. Now, what makes this possible is the technology, so that you can collaborate through emails and voice and video over internet and FaceTime and some of these other chat programs. So what do you do with collaboration? Well, here's what I think you need to do. I think you need to look for researchers or other professionals who share your interest. So what kind of research are you interested in, and look for people who have that same interest, because they're out there and they want to do research just as much as you do, because they want to solve problems within their organization. So this is a way that you can expand your influence rather than just publishing a paper. This is a way to kind of get your ideas out there by working through other people who have those similar interests. Trend number 6 deals with research requirements. Now, we've always had the notion of publish or perish in higher ed. You know that going in. If you don't publish, you aren't going to be in higher ed very long. Then, and I'm going to say 50 years ago, there was the requirement for it, but most research was done at research institutions. That's where the expectation was the highest. You were publishing something 3 or 4 times a year, 5 times a year. And a lot of that scholarship was books and book chapters, that kind of thing, not so much the journal articles. That's only, say, been in the last 50 years or so that we've seen a greater emphasis on publishing in journals rather than writing books. Obviously, books take longer to write. So now we're seeing the professor in higher ed publishing 2 or 3 publications a year. Now, teaching institutions, that wasn't the requirement. Even historically, professors gave lectures at a teaching institution, but they didn't really do a lot of external publication. I mean, some did, but it wasn't the main requirement, just effective teaching. But now, universities are demanding that everybody publish. Whether you're at a teaching institution or a research institution, there is a demand that you get the university's name and thereby your own name in print, and that is showing that you are the scholar that you purport to be. So what does this mean for you? Well, I think what it means for you is you need an active research agenda, and most universities require this on an annual basis, that a professor submit a research agenda, what they hope to accomplish in the next year, and then keep that agenda updated as they accomplish it. As you progress through higher ed, there's going to be a greater and greater focus on publishing books rather than just journal articles. But the research requirement is out there and it's not changing. I don't necessarily see that it's going to increase in any great way. In other words, hey, you need to have 10 articles a year rather than 2 or 3. But I know that that's going to be a constant part of the higher ed lifestyle, is that you're going to be engaged in research. Trend number 7 deals with the workload of the faculty member. I think that faculty have always worked hard, but probably not as hard as they are working today in their not only teaching responsibilities, but also their research and the committees that they serve on. And I think that what's happening is the increase in workload is more on the committee side, mentoring of new faculty and supporting students. And that is simply because, as you'll see here later on, with college enrollments changing, there are not as many professors around to do the work, and so more work is being laid on individual professors to do to keep things going. So as professors retire, they're not being replaced, which means that workload has to be balanced among those who remain. So yeah, I think your workload at the university is going to be pretty high, and yes, that's part of the research process. You're going to need to strive for efficiency, and what I have done in that is I have set aside a day to work on research, and my day is Tuesday. So when I'm in the office at the university on Tuesdays, I really try not to take any appointments on that day so that I can spend my time doing research and preparing materials for publication. And right now I'm working on a book, so that's what I'm spending my time is outlining and drafting and doing research for that book. And I have found this year is when I really dedicated Tuesdays, is that I'm getting so much more done because I know today is the day I have to do it. And then on Wednesday and the rest of the week I can focus on my classes and other things. And I don't feel bad about kind of making research a second place kind of a thing. So I would say strive for efficiency. That means look for that day to focus on. Work smarter, not necessarily harder. Look for ways to cut out things that are distractions. And then finally, you may have to multitask. Be able to do more than one thing at a time. And maybe if you schedule your time, you'll be able to get more accomplished. And I think that's what I have found probably is the real secret here, is that it's probably doubtful that you're going to multitask, but you can organize your time better, and you'll be more efficient, and you'll get more done by doing it that way. So yeah, workloads are going to increase, and that's just something we're seeing now, and I think you'll see that into the future as well. Trend number 8. Operating budgets are really pretty stagnant. Here in the United States, we've seen college enrollments remain pretty flat. In other words, we're not seeing a great increase in students going to college. And that has not been the case historically. You know, obviously, right after World War II, college enrollments went way up, and that carried through most of the 50s and 60s, and probably into the 70s even. But since about the 80s till now, we've kind of seen a decrease in college because really a lot of parents are questioning whether going to college is worth the money that you have to spend. There are so many different ways of getting jobs here in the United States, so there's some that are saying, why spend $200,000 to go to college when you can go to a vocational school, get whatever training you need for that vocation, and get out there and start earning money. Well, obviously that tells you that, vocations may not need a college education, and those students don't need to go to college. But there are many professions that require college education, so you do need that. All of this to say that because enrollments are flat or only minimally increasing, that means there's not a lot of money in the college's budget to pay for travel to events and to pay to conduct research. So here's what you have to prepare for. You have to prepare to pay your own way to conferences. Yep, that's just part of college life. That's part of being a professor, is you may have to pay your own way. You may even have to pay your own research expenses to get the research done. And while it would be nice if the university would pay for it, probably not going to happen, or they're not going to give as much as they gave in the past. Another option for you is to seek external funding. There are always grant opportunities online that you can find. Many industries have foundations that they funnel their profits to and provide grant opportunities for conducting research. So you're going to have to be more creative about how you try to fund your research and how you fund your publication and presentation experiences. Trend number 9 deals with the relevance of research. And I think that's changed over the last, say, 50 years. Research then was, I think, far more meaningful because there was less of it being done, so the quality of the research was much higher. I also think that it was more closely scrutinized. And so because of that, you got a lot of groundbreaking research. But today, everybody's doing research. And because of the internet, everybody's publishing their research. And because the expectation that everybody's supposed to do it, and there are more places for you to put your research, a lot of these journals are setting very low expectations for the research. Much of the research that I'm seeing is just for the sake of tenure and promotion. Basically, it's research for the sake of research. And so it's really low quality stuff. Small sample sizes, questionable methodologies and strategies, and the results are, I hate to say it, pretty meaningless or have very little meaning or significance. The result of that is that this low-quality research really obscures the high-quality research that is being done out there. I think that as you start a research study, the question you have to ask yourself first is, how will my research efforts contribute to what we know about this topic? Will they really contribute, or is it just going to be kind of more fluff to that topic? In other words, basically meaningless finding. That's a guiding question. That's not going to help you with your individual study. But what we're trying to say is, as you conduct research, you need to make sure that this research is meaningful. And I don't want to be negative here on this point. I just think that we need to take greater care to make sure that what we're producing is of the highest quality in its relevance to the field and to the discipline. Trend number 10, quality versus quantity. This has been an ongoing battle. Is it better to have lots of papers on your vita, in other words, lots of publications to your credit, that are maybe of a low quality? Or is it better to have a few really high quality research studies out there? Well, if you want a personal opinion, I think I would prefer a few very good publications rather than a whole lot of mediocre and low quality publications. Now, historically, more time was taken in the producing of research. It took time to do the research, for one. And I think that there was the idea that we're not going to publish our research until we really get good results. So the research was well planned, the studies were appropriately designed, and they were ethically approved. And you knew that when this research was completed, it was going to be high quality research. Now, I'm not so sure. I think people are so desperate to get stuff out there because, they want to get tenure, they want to get promotion to full professor or to associate professor. So they're trying to kind of get everything out there they can so that they can go into that tenure and promotion committee and see, I have 10 articles to my credit, or whatever it is. But I think that's a trap, because it gets you into the cycle of you're trying to put research on an assembly line, and research is just not done that way. Research takes time, and sometimes you get a lot done, but other times, you're working on the same article for several years. What I would say is devote the time that you need to produce high-quality research. And if that takes you 2 years or 3 years, then it takes you 2 or 3 years. Now you say, well, I'm not a tenured professor. I've got to have something done here in 5 years. Well, then work to get something done that is of high quality that you can stand behind. And maybe only have 2 of those articles when you go up for tenure promotion. But after you have tenure, then you have more time to really produce that high quality research. So that's my encouragement to you is, let's go for quality, not necessarily quantity. And number 11, authorship. I have seen some papers where there were 7 or 8 or 9 authors on the paper, and I often wondered who actually wrote the paper. I mean, how can 9 people write one paper that's 9 pages, 10 pages long? In bygone years, you had very few authors on the publication. Maybe you had the lead author and 1 or 2 others who made significant contributions to the intellectual content. They were involved in the design as well as the carrying out of the research. Now it seems like we have a lot of ghost authors put on there, and it's not unusual even in the Philippines, where the department chair has their name on a publication, even though they didn't do anything with the paper at all, but their name is on there as an author. And some professors, they do that because they know that when the department chair's name is on the paper, the department chair is going to take credit for that and be more likely to grant them the leave time or get them the money in order to travel. Stop doing that. The idea is, if they didn't write it, if they didn't make a contribution, their name doesn't need to be on there. I want collaboration in writing, yes, but I don't want ghost authors, the people who don't have anything to do with it but still have a name there. So, to me, I think that when you have multiple authors, there's this idea that, well, this must be a high-quality study because there's a lot of people who have been involved in it. That's not necessarily the case. What I want you to do is look for people who will write with you that are going to actually make a contribution. And just because they review your statistics, that doesn't necessarily mean that they should be an author on the paper. That's service-related kind of thing. That's not right. Now, if they wrote some of the paper, then fine. If they wrote the statistical section, then fine, put that in there. But if they're just reviewing your statistics and providing you with the analysis, no, I'm not so sure I'd put their name on the paper. But the key is, keep in mind that not everybody needs to be on this paper if they didn't have a part in creating it. Number 12, redundant publication, means that there are 2 or more papers that an author has produced that share a same or similar hypothesis, data, or conclusions without cross-referencing. I know of professors who did a study for their dissertation, and it was a broad study, and what they're doing is they're using the same data set, but they're slicing the data a little bit differently to look at maybe a different question. But it's very, very similar. The hypothesis is very similar. And yet they're getting another publication out of it. And their whole point is, wow, I can get 3 publications out of this data set. Historically, that wouldn't have happened. It would have been a different study, a different data population, and that would have been a completely different study. But today, because people feel so pressured to get research out there, they're trying to slice the data thinner and thinner so they can use it more and more times. Instead of getting a new sample, a new population, they just use the one they had before, but they twist it a little bit and then come up with a new study. And it's not really a new study. It's maybe a furtherance of an existing study, but they also don't reference that this was data from another study that they're using. So this is an ethical thing. It's an integrity issue. My thought for you on this would be, set a high ethical standard. This behavior should not be something that you engage in. This is one of those things, if you're doing this, stop doing it. It's not good for research. It's not good for your professional reputation. So this is one to stop. Come up with a new topic. Come up with a new hypothesis. Come up with a new sample size, a new sample group to work with. Don't just keep doing the same kind of study over and over again with the same population size, same population group or whatever. Stop this practice of slicing the data different ways to try to come up with different conclusions that are basically the same or similar to ones you've done before. This, to me, is an exciting time to be conducting research. And here's 3 reasons why I think it's exciting. Number 1, technology has made it much easier for us to analyze our data. So especially those quantitative designs where you can use a program called SPSS, which allows us to do statistical analysis of data, where in the past it would have taken someone weeks to calculate an ANOVA or to calculate the variance by hand. The computer can do it in just minutes. So that makes analysis much easier. The internet is making it possible for us to collaborate as well as to find information. And then just think about it. Word processing. You're not typing this on a typewriter and then you make a mistake having to either retype the entire page or to white out a little section of a word or a letter and then retype it. You don't have that. Now you can just reprint. Fix, reprint, fix, and reprint. So word processing has made it a lot easier. And then, of course, collaboration. Because of the technology, we're able to collaborate with professors from all over, just as I'm working with you this weekend here via technology. A second area that makes me excited about doing research is the number of publications. I'm not concerned about publishing in Tier 1 journals. I know that there are some that are, and that's what they want to be sure their publications in that. No, I'm not. That doesn't bother me. I mean, I knew I was never going to be famous in higher ed. So I'm okay to publish in a Tier 2 journal because I just want to get my stuff out there. But you do have to be careful because even though there are thousands of journals out there, you need to make sure that they are reputable. There's a lot of them that are very predatory. They want you to pay them a fee in order to publish in their journal. Now, I'm not saying that paying a reprint fee is wrong, but if you have to pay to get accepted, there's a problem. So you need to investigate what's actually going on. The third thing that makes me excited about, of course, is the time. Setting aside a daily time or a weekly time for research is going to make you far more productive. I set aside about 4 hours, although here 1 to 2 hours may be all that you have because of teaching all throughout the week. But set aside some time, schedule the time, and you stick to the schedule. Just like you schedule an appointment with your doctor or you schedule an appointment with a student, you schedule an appointment to be in your office or in your cubicle and doing your research. And you close the door or you don't take them, and you tell people on Tuesday or Wednesday from 9 o'clock until noon, I am going to be doing research. I do not want to be disturbed unless it is an emergency. Find that time. When you may work better in the morning, well then do it in the morning. Or if you work better at night, then do it at night. But the key is schedule your time so that you can focus on your research. With all good things, there must be an end, and we have now reached that point. And the conference is still just in its early stages, but my session is over, and if you'd like to contact me, here's how you do it. You can send me an email to the davisr@troy.edu address. That's probably the easiest way to get in touch with me. Or you can contact Julie, and she'll be glad to forward any messages on. I look forward to future events with you. My next trip to the Philippines will be April of 2020, so hopefully we'll see you at a future event. Until then, take care.